Welcome to Killer Psychologist. Today we have a special guest, Jessee Baldwin. And today we're going to discuss one of the most emotionally charged areas of civil law, childhood sexual abuse cases. And recently, I found out that Jessee Baldwin was a victim of childhood sexual abuse. And I found out by watching you on the news. And this was recently because you and I went to school together back in the day at North Valley Christian School. And I went there for 12 years. And I think you were there about the same length of time that I was. And I had no idea that what happened. And so I was so taken back by what I heard. I just immediately reached out to you and just wanted to express my support to you as a friend and somebody that knew you, and see how I could support you, because I just was so proud of you for telling your story. And I only wish I would have known sooner. And, you know, as a forensic psychologist, I help people in civil lawsuit cases now, and I understand how difficult it is. And people share their stories to me. And I've interviewed probably over 40 victims in civil lawsuit cases, going through the details of the abuse. Some of them on their deathbed or, you know, crying, different stages of life, but like finally sharing their experience. And it's been really challenging for me to hear so many stories over time that of these situations of abuse that have occurred in the remote past, but people weren't able to tell what was happening at the time. And so with each person that I interview, I'd always try to say, what can I learn from you? Like, how could we do better? Like, you know, what could get people to open up and report these things to me? And it is something that is so prevalent. I don't know how to express that enough. But even I was just at the gym the other day, and I was approached by two separate people who told me they had been raped, and they knew what I did for work, and they were hoping I could encourage. One of them was like struggling with how to report it. And so this conversation we have today, I hope that people really listen and to your experience. And I know you reported it much later because it's so confusing when you're a child. But I hope that people understand the importance of reporting and understanding in a civil lawsuit. That's a different type of justice. So it doesn't always play out in criminal court. And we know recently in California, the statute of limitations opened up, and that may have affected why you were actually able to report at this time. And I'm just briefly going to share what that statute was. And then I would love for you to share what gave you the courage to come forward and share your story. Or maybe you were like, oh, that window of opportunity is coming in right now. I got to get on that. But in California, the statute of limitations for childhood sexual assault had gone under significant changes. And historically, I think you had until age 26 or within 3 years of discovering the damages to file a lawsuit. And then there was an Assembly Bill 218 known as the California Child Victims Act. And that was effective in January of 2020. And that extended the filing deadline to age 40 or within 5 years of discovering the damages. So, Jessee, I would love to have you share with us what gave you the courage to come forward at this time?
Great question. I don't know that courage really had anything to do with it. It's more like when you have a realization so much later in life that what you thought was one thing was actually another, it's such an explosive event in your mind that I felt like it was something that just had to be told. You've talked to a lot of people in my situation, but it probably hits different, us having this conversation when I've known you since I was a kid. Like, this hits really close to home. You didn't know. And when I came forward with my story, message after message after message of adults that were in my life at that time saying, I'm so sorry I didn't know. I'm so sorry I didn't know. And so as I came forward, there was almost like this collective shockwave that affected hundreds of people who knew me personally at that church, at that school. That was something I didn't expect or foresee happening. But it was very healing and a part of the process of my healing being validated with not one person said, I don't believe you. Everyone knew it had happened, but they just didn't quite understand. And so me coming forward really provided a lot of clarity for so many people who back then heard only whispers and rumors and didn't really quite know what had happened. And then they're like, okay, this all makes sense. Was it an act of courage to do the civil suit? I'm going to say yes, because I tried to do it several times before I actually did. And I pulled back because I was scared. But the biggest act of courage I had was actually reporting it to police and doing a police report. That was the scariest thing because I wasn't quite at a point where I had fully even realized what had happened. And I was reporting based off of the recommendation of my therapist at the time, who said, you're approaching your 40th birthday. You need to report this. I was not ready. That was the biggest act of courage looking back that I had, that trust that I had in her, looking forward at what would be best for me. And she said, you don't realize what happened now. You're still under the effects of the grooming. But I promise you, as we work together, we uncover this, you start to heal. You need to do this for your future self. And so I did report. That was really scary. I didn't appreciate that process either, but they do give you a victim advocate, which is great. I believe her name was Deborah Heidi in Shasta County, and she went with everything. Yeah. So
yeah,
you're not in that process alone, which is really nice. And so I had her by my side for everything. We did pretext phone calls, all sorts of things that we can talk about if you want to dig into it. And what led up to doing the civil suit. I had already done all the courageous things in my mind before the civil suit. The civil suit was scary. They get really personal. And you have to relive things you don't want to think about anymore. And that is, and it does take courage. But I was so much further along in my healing process when I took the steps for the civil suit than when I had first reported.
This was quite a journey. So just going through the steps of being in therapy for quite a while to even get to the next step of making the report. And I love that you share that because there's a lot of things that have to happen before someone can feel comfortable enough to make the call. And as a psychologist, like I have helped pick up the phone and call or put on speaker, or I'll start the conversation and like assist so that, and I feel like that is really important to like help someone be emotionally present with them and then like debrief with them afterwards and during and like support them so that they have hopefully a positive experience through it to like have a sense of relief. But I typically encourage people to have a support person with them to not do it alone because you get lost or confused or you give up or you hang up. And I'm really glad you had such a supportive therapist that even all this time later is encouraging you to make that call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She was great. And I was with that particular therapist, I think about 4 years. And therapy has been a very important process and part of my healing. But reporting to the police, that was an important layer of my healing. Going through with a civil lawsuit, that was an important part of my healing. Telling my story to the news or anyone else, that's all a part of my healing. Because what comes with, for a lot of times, for men and women, what comes with sexual abuse is a lot of shame. And I think that's hard to understand unless you've actually been through it. But I've had people tell me they hear stories of sexual abuse and they're embarrassed for the person talking about it. That right there shows how there's shame attached to it. And it is something that's very hard to talk about. But the more you talk about it and the more you bring it into the light and you almost normalize talking about it, instead of it being this hush little thing that no one talks about that's in this family's past, the more you talk about it and the more you make it more common to talk about it, then that shame starts to disappear and it becomes more easier for people who come behind you to do the same thing.
Yeah, I called you right away to just, I was just proud of you. And I just loved that you were just so authentic and vulnerable and just put yourself out there. I knew when I saw you on TV, I said a lot went into this to get to that point. People have no idea. And I wanted to immediately support you because not all people are supportive. And we know that because that's why it took this long to get here. Because, even in the environment we were in, which is a very small, tight-knit religious community. So there's, judgment. You're facing judgment, fear of community backlash, rejection. You're going to be ostracized from your community. People might blame you or accuse you of lying so then you're met with all these other emotions like of just rejection. And I just look back because we went to school together and I actually remember you were in a grade below me, right?
I think 2.
Okay. I remember watching you and the relationship with this teacher, which I barely knew her. I just knew that I observed you guys spent a lot of time together and I questioned it. And I thought, nobody hangs out with me. No one gives me attention. I didn't know what to think of it. It seemed off, that it went on for quite a while, but
Years.
I did expect as like a child that the adults they were smarter or, they've been around longer. They would, if there's something was happening, they would say something or do something and then I just figured that I knew you were special. I thought you were really funny and really highly intelligent. And I always thought you were really cool. And we always joked around. Or you're doing something funny or rebellious or
always something rebellious, Dana. Always.
That's the only way we got attention.
That's pretty much how you and I connected. We were doing something we were not supposed to be doing, but
we're doing something really immature, laughing inappropriately.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to your Preacher Boys podcast, which everyone should listen to. It's on YouTube and it's about 2 hours and 17 minutes, but raw, vulnerable, emotional take on someone sharing their story. If you don't give that a thumbs up and give her comment, that's hard to do. So I applaud that.
Thank you. I wanted to point out what you talked about though as your perspective as a kid, because this grooming process, it affected not just me. Because you saw that as a child and saw how much attention she was giving to me, thinking, oh, she must be special. I was thinking the same thing. I must be special. And then all the adults around us not intervening or raising any red flags about it. That's part of the grooming process for everyone else who's watching. If no one in authority or no one who is supposed to protect the children do anything, then it must be okay. Because most people, I think their default is not to stick their nose into something and raise an alarm about something that isn't actually anything. You don't want to be that person. You don't want to be like, excuse me, they're spending a lot of time together. This seems a little bit off. Most adults, I don't think, I would, because I'm like that, but I think most adults don't want to rock the boat. And they just go with status quo, especially when you're talking about a church environment or a school environment where there is a bit of a hierarchy and authoritative power, and you don't question a person who has more authority than you. By and large, it's just something that you don't do in a Christian culture. Would you agree with that? So it really just went on way too long with a lot of signs. And I really appreciate that I get to talk to you, and I get to hear your perspective because you were there.
I was there, and, being in such a small, tight-knit, religious environment, I'm not under the impression that the system was set up to know how to respond to situations like that. And I'm saying this as a psychologist, who I've gone to schools or gone to reporting events and things. And so you have to have certain systems in place to report abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and physical abuse, sexual abuse. So you have to have a place where people feel comfortable sharing and disclosing this information. And that's can be very challenging in these, I want to say, sort of punitive environments where if you disclose you're participating in something that they disagree with, it's a complicated situation. Even for so this is why they have school psychologists now and certain staff that are on site at schools, and kids are referred to go talk to them, or they're watching out for these things, or they're interacting. And sometimes these really small private schools, there was no therapist, there was no psychologist, or what are the laws on reporting? And no one taught me, no one told me, because there was lots of things going on. But I was looking for the adults to give me information about what to do. And I didn't have a class in that. Obviously, I'm a grown up now, and I've literally took classes on how to report, right? These things. And I think it's important. What kind of starts in the home as parents, where you create an environment where it's a trusting relationship, where your child can feel safe sharing their thoughts and feelings, even about small things. So when something more serious comes up, they're more likely to disclose it earlier on before it even gets to be a problem. And then your parents give you direction and guidance that, teaching and enforcing boundaries, right? And so there's usually early intervention is what you want, right, within your family. And as we know, people that are vulnerable for abuse, there's usually, sort of at least one absent parent who's maybe emotionally disconnected or even not even present. And so people that are looking to groom or manipulate a child, it's like they look for that opportunity to gain emotional closeness with you. And what better way is to let you know you're special, and start spending that time together. And
everyone wants to hear that. Every kid wants to hear that they're special. And if they're not getting that attention at home, they're not getting that love, that nurturing, they're going to find it elsewhere, and they're prime targets.
They will find it elsewhere. So just remember that if parents are listening, if you're not giving your love and attention, if your kids aren't getting it from home, they will get it. They will get it. They will definitely get it. And there's always someone out there willing to give it to them. you just want to be aware of who that's going to be. There's plenty of people lined up to like move in, right? To be that person. They're called predators.
Yeah, they
And
target their prey, right? And a lot of people ask, what can we do to protect our children? The prime thing you can do is please have a good relationship with your children. Create a safe place where they feel loved and accepted and they can come to you with anything. Because those kids, they don't get duped like I did.
100%. 100%. So, and I wrote a couple things down. So building that emotional closeness. So like I was just saying, creating an open, trusting relationship with your child where they can feel safe sharing those thoughts and feelings. Like, let that sink in. You don't want to be so punitive. Your child starts to tell you something and you're going to punish them or spank them or judge them or ostracize them, or I don't have time to hear this. Like, you have to be available to hear these things. Like, keep that door open all the time. And then teach and enforce those boundaries. So help your child understand their right to personal space and teach them to say no to any touch that feels wrong, even from someone they know, and emphasize that secrets about their body are never okay. And then the last thing is educate without fear. So you want to teach your kid things not out of fear. Just talk to your children in an age-appropriate way about what is safe and unsafe behavior, what that looks like. Just use simple examples and let them know it's always okay to tell you if they feel uncomfortable, even if the person involved is a family member or an authority figure. So one of the things that I see in my experience is that these situations involve authority figures. And that's a broad term, but for children, almost everyone, an adult, would be more of an authority figure. And sorry, something just popped up on my screen. So you never want to teach like being overly submissive. Like, you should question authority. I know my parents, I always question their authority. And me and my sisters did, and I still question authority. And it's a good thing. And I teach my kids to question it, and they do question me too. But it's a good thing. You should question authority. You shouldn't have just blind faith in whatever anyone tells you. And you don't want to teach your kids, if any person in authority just tells you to do something, you do it and don't question it. Like, so as a parent, if your child asks you a question, like, let them ask questions and also have a good answer and have a good response, right?
Wow, you're setting your kids up for success that way. And no one ever talked to me about good touch, bad touch. And when this teacher groomed me so masterfully, I mean, it lasted till I was like 40. So she did a really good job. That wasn't even my first encounter with sexual abuse. So I was sexually abused by my grandpa when I was younger. And so you would think at that point, my parents would have gone over this with me, but still, so when I had my own children, I didn't scare them. I got a book off of Amazon that had lots of good reviews, and it was age appropriate. And I talked to them about all of these things. And it was kind of comical. One day I got a call from the preschool teacher that my son went to, and he said, I need to let you know that Nicholas needed help in the bathroom today. And so I helped him, and he let me know he was telling his mommy that I helped him in the bathroom. I was super proud of my son because I trained him to do that. But this teacher was almost like, oh my gosh. And like, of course, nothing nefarious was happening there, but I had talked to my son. And then when he came and talked to me, we were able to talk through the situation. Open communication. So many families, for some reason, don't talk about this. And I'm not sure why, but my parents didn't. And I had no clue. I had no idea that I was being used for someone else's sexual gratification. I had no clue. I thought it was a special relationship. I thought it was something that no one else could understand. And I think a lot of times, bring this back to the religious family thing with what you said, is teach your kids to question authority. That does not happen in Christian circles. By and large, you submit, I don't need to go too much into it, but I think that Christian kids are even more susceptible to this happening because you were told to do as you were told. And you're setting your kid up to be abused and used because they're doing as they're told. And there's a fear there.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't stress it enough. It's never too early to start teaching your kids. So, I mean, when my kids were, they're toddlers, right? Before they go to preschool, boundaries, touch, all of that. We communicating what's appropriate. Like I'm demonstrating that as a mother. I have 2 boys. And I am a forensic psychologist. So you better believe that I had all these conversations with my children. And I'll share this. I know my oldest son, he's 24. He listens to the podcast, but I'll tell you a story because he was about 4 years old. And I always said, if anything, I was, am I a paranoid mother? Like, yes, I was always just like, anyway, anytime you don't feel safe, anyone looks at you strange, anything you don't like, you always tell me, like, I always want to know everything, right? Every night, bedtime stories, like there's always that time for communicate anything. Like, I want to know everything. And he told me one day, like the neighbor was watching him after school while I was doing homework. And I just was always asking how it was going. He said he didn't like the way he didn't want to go there again. And I said, why? And he said he didn't like the way the dad talked to the mom. And I said, and that was it. So that was it. And he said, and I said, what do you want me to do about it? And he said, I don't want to go over there again. And I said, okay. And he was 4, he was in preschool. And so I never brought him back over there. I just had, and I just thought there was something there that he didn't like, and just that was his boundary, and he didn't want to go back. And I, decided, he wasn't going to go back over there. So it was years and years and years later that my neighbor, my friend, I won't say her name, but she was telling me like her husband was giving her drugs and raping her, and she had found out. And so there was domestic violence, and he was talking to her in a certain way, and there was a bigger issue that played out later. And so just a child can sense things that are just maybe, just something minor that they're not comfortable with. So even if it's just something small like that, you want your child to tell you, and then you can just take a corrective measure. Like, we never have to go there again, or there's never going to be a problem, or I'm just glad to know that. Like,
well,
right?
Your son learned in that moment, mommy listens to me.
Well, and I did. And I thought, I said, and so you just be available to talk to your kids. And so open-ended questions. So open-ended question is any question that you don't answer with a yes or no. So if you're talking to your kids, just be available to listen to them, and without judgment. And and talk to them about all these things. You want to be the one that tells them about touch and all these inappropriate behaviors before someone else does it. Mm-hmm. So I'm telling them no one should ever touch you, or you should never be in these, like, I'm explaining it, even if all different scenarios. And so I know, I don't know if I'm the only mom that has done this, but I've literally role played with my kids. What happens if this happened? Or what if they said this? Or what if you were all alone and you didn't have your phone? And like hypothetical scenarios.
Absolutely. And you should do that because it makes it real to the child. I went to a Little League event a few years ago at a park, and I told my son and my daughter, just so you know, if someone comes up to you and says, hey, I've got some puppies, you want to come see them? There are no puppies. You are to run, you are to get my attention and other adults. And like, I role played with them. I kid you not, we walk into this event, and right to the right, there's a booth of puppies. And I said, okay, well, these puppies are okay.
Okay, these puppies look real.
That was pretty hilarious. But there's nothing wrong with role playing and putting it practice makes permanent. And so when they can, it's kind of like my kids are in driver's ed right now, my twins, and they learned today about pumping the brake if the brakes fail. And about a year ago, I was driving a super beater minivan and my brakes failed. The ABS light had been on for 5 years. They failed. And in that moment, I was trained to pump the brakes. I didn't have to stop to think about it. I did it, which is why having those conversations, you're training your child. You're training them to be safe. And even though the conversations might be uncomfortable, you can utilize a book to help you have those conversations, which is what I did. It was very uncomfortable for me to have these conversations with my children. I didn't like it. I didn't want to do it. It was triggering for all sorts of reasons, but I did it because I knew I had to keep them safe. And I knew that conversation never happened with me. And if it had, like, I'm a strong bull in a china shop, intelligent kind of woman, right? No one would think that I would be so incredibly duped. And I talk a little bit more about that in my previous interview with Preacher Boys. But if someone had just said something, anything, to give me a fighting chance, instead, I'm left with the long-term effects of 5+ years of abuse from this teacher.
Well, and I want to point out that you were vulnerable in so many ways, but because you had this prior experience, you were, as a child, you were really conditioned, like, that needed a full intervention and therapy and discussion around that to help you understand, like, a healthy relationship.
I
And
did have therapy around that.
you
But
did.
I did. I remember talking to a social worker. I remember seeing a therapist for a couple of years. Her name was Christine, and she had a farm, and she took me to see her dogs.
Mm.
But not one time, it was like play therapy. Not one time do we actually talk about the issue.
Mm.
It was never brought up. And anytime I felt like she was steering that way, I felt like she was trying to trick me into admitting something that had happened. And so I would just deflect or shut down. I never actually one time ever talked about that early first experience. And I think after 2 years of my parents paying for therapy and it just wasn't working because I was just completely shut down about it. It just was done. But I used to go home early from school, like every Thursday at 3:00 because I had this appointment. And my mom would get me a Slurpee. I went for the Slurpees. For real. But no one actually, I was so shut down, I never actually talked about it. The first person I ever talked to about that experience was with that teacher. She was the first adult to make me feel safe, which sounds really sick and really twisted, but that is the truth. She was the first adult to make me feel loved, safe, accepted, special. She was the first adult I ever told about what he did in any amount of detail. And she held me while I cried. I mean, that bond that she forged with me was so strong. So strong. And that process of healing and uncovering that has been grueling.
Yeah. I appreciate what you're saying. I think it's a reminder for people, like, as a parent, or you're sending our kids to therapy, but, like, is this really being talked about? Like, what, into to what extent, and, like, how are we going to prevent this from happening again? So, it's so hard when you have this was your grandpa, so a person, your family member, a trusted family member, a position of authority, and someone that actually showed you love. And I was listening to your podcast you did on Preacher Boys, just going into the detail, like, that was the person that probably showed you the first love. And so, like, that makes a really confusing mixed message that love, like, it's confusing because they're actually making you feel good and special and giving you attention, but also doing these other things. So that crosses over into other relationships. When anyone shows your, like, it's very confusing. And that's sad that the only person that's showing you love is someone that's trying to manipulate you, like, sexually, right?
Yeah, it sets you up for a world of hurt later on. I mean, all through life. It really is confusing, and things that I've had to work through myself, like early on, just thinking sex equals love. And there's no other way to accept or feel loved other than through sex, which, I mean, I know anyone else who's experienced what I've experienced understands that, or anything even close to it understands that. And learning that there are other ways to feel, receive, give love outside of sex is a whole nother learning process and part of the healing process as well. But yeah, it really affects long-term relationships for life. Like, I was married for 15 years and I went into that marriage very broken and didn't know it. He was also very broken and didn't know it. Thankfully, we made 4 beautiful children together, but the 2 of us together was not good. So I've been able to get a lot of healing outside of that marriage now, and hopefully he has too. I have no idea, but I know that it affects your long-term relationships, and just understanding that you were groomed also really messes you up with not being able to trust anyone ever again. It's hard because you don't want to feel that pain. You don't ever want to be duped. So you like put yourself in a box of your own making, a protective box. Like, that's not ever going to happen to me again. No one's ever going to take advantage of me or dupe me like that again. And you're not open to any future relationships. Like, these are things that I'm working on right now, because it was really hard coming to an acceptance that that relationship when I was 12 and she was 42 was not consensual and could not be consensual and was not okay. And uncovering that and realizing that and allowing yourself to accept that is its own form of hell. And most people, I think, can't even begin to peel that back until they're in their 40s, which is why it's so good the statute of limitation laws are changing. You can't process it. You can't accept it. It's survival. It's survival to live in what you thought it was. Because unmasking that is really scary and hard. And some people can't survive it, and so they don't unmask it. And they take these things to their grave. And I understand that.
That is true. I have interviewed a lot of men, and they're very prone to taking it to their grave. Right to the very end, they only disclosed it because it was right. The statute of limitations opened up, and a lot of these men were much, much older. But for some, it was the first time sharing what had happened. And I will tell you this, and listen, these men that told me the things that happened to them at these church camps, after school programs, all of this, their wife, their kids, their family do not know. They were not telling their wife in the other room. That's a fact. So I'm telling you that it happens, and it happens a lot more often than you think, just across sexes. But it is true. People don't tell. And here is my experience, that the people that I've worked with who get the courage to share what happened with even just one person. And the crazy part is, so many men that I've interviewed that never told their wife through their whole marriage, like, it really ruined their relationship. It never was healthy. The healthiest outcomes for people, in my experience, were people that were finally able to just speak their truth and say it. And the most successful ones were ones that were able to just verbalize it, even publicly, shamelessly, tell their family. They had such a healthier life, emotionally, or just more balanced, more well-equipped. Keeping it a secret, I haven't met anyone where that benefited them.
It gives them that sense of control, though. at least in my experience. When you keep it to yourself and you keep it in a box, yes, you're not allowing yourself to heal, but it's your secret and it's yours to control. The moment that you expose that out, like these men, I can only imagine their wives would look at them differently in their minds. That might not even be what actually happens, but your perception is your reality. Men, they're strong. They're the protectors. They don't want to ever be seen as weak or taken advantage of, especially if the perpetrator was another man or even a woman. It really doesn't matter. It's shameful. And you don't want the person who you want to be viewed as, I'm strong, I'm the leader, I'm the man. You don't want them to know you were ever weak and vulnerable like that. So you take it to your grave, but it affects your relationships. It affects everything. And so relinquishing that control, it relinquishes the shame and everything starts to get better. But the process of even believing that that's going to happen, it really takes a strong support person like a therapist or a really close friend or someone that you can confide in. It's not, in my opinion, it's not something that I did alone. I don't know that it can be done alone. I mean, I had so many people involved in my healing process. I didn't do anything on my own. And it was really scary just with all the support that I had. So I truly believe that there are so many stories that go untold, countless thousands. But the more that people talk about things like what I'm doing, I said this on the Preacher Boys podcast, I listened to so many other interviews of other survivors before I ever got brave enough to even think about looking at it myself. But it helped. Every time someone would talk about it, I'd watch the interview and I'd almost be like this. Oh my gosh, I can't believe she said that. Oh my gosh, I can't believe he said that. Wow. Like, wow. And I'm like, they're not ashamed. They're not hanging their head in shame. They're not coming on. And some did. Remember the early 2020 and the face would be blacked out while someone's talking about their abuse? Yeah. Hopefully we're way away from that unless, there's some sort of secret witness thing happening. But there's just so much shame involved. You're like, I don't want anyone to know that this is me or this happened to me. This is a terrible thing to have happen. But part of the healing process, if someone will allow themselves to start that process with someone who can support them, you'll come to find out that thing that happened to you didn't actually happen to you. It sounds really weird. It happens for you. But I believe that in life anyway, things happen for you. And what you do with it and how you take your next steps forward, that says everything about you. And you get to choose that. I didn't get to choose the abuse that happened to me, but I do get to choose what I do with it once I realized it. So I could hide, dig myself in a hole, and continue to have not great relationships, constant triggers, overeating, all the stuff that happens with it. Or I can take it on. Okay, this happened. What can I do moving forward? And how can I help other people with my story? Because so many people helped me by sharing their stories. And it's going to be another voice in that sea that hopefully just helps the next person.
Absolutely. I want to talk about 12-year-old Jessee. What would she say about you now? Would she be proud of you?
Yeah, I think she would think I was pretty badass.
I totally know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I had this picture of me at 12 and the teacher, Bonna Johnson, holding on to me. And you can just see the possession, the ownership there in that photo. And I just had no clue. And I think she would be really proud that I stood up for me. Once I realized it, I didn't hide. I am not a person who backs down from a fight anyway. But this was something that so completely turned my life upside down in so many really difficult ways. And I think she'd be proud for sure.
Well, I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
What would you want to tell that 12-year-old Jessee?
Oh my gosh. It's funny you say that. I have had so many people write me and say, if I had known what was happening, I would have, and then they describe what they want to do to her, which is not helpful, but it's part of their processing. Golly, if I could just reach in and go back there, I don't even know what I would say. Like if I could say something, if I had a time machine and I could go back and talk to myself, I'm telling you, I was so groomed. I wouldn't believe a thing I'd say. And that's really hard. But what I would say to her is, you're special. You're going to get through this. And I promise you, you have an amazing life ahead of you. I don't know that I would have listened to, hey, she's groomed you. She's abusing you. This is not what it seems. I don't know that I would have heard a word of that. I really don't, because I was so in deep. But, I can look back on myself at 12, and you do this in therapy sessions and have conversations and have compassion. I've done that with 4-year-old Jessee. And that kind of stuff's really helpful in a supportive therapeutic environment.
And looking back, and even now, what do you believe needs to change within religious or educational institutions to better protect children?
Boy, I love that you asked that question. So one thing that I am currently doing as an occupation is I'm a school bus driver. And I have to tell you, you have to go through this vector training. The church I'm attending right now has it as well. And going through this vector training as an adult, knowing what I went through, is so hard. Because I'm like, oh my gosh, where were the adults in my life? This is common sense stuff. It is so hard to see, but it's also so good. You cannot judge what you're seeing. If there's this common saying, I see it, it's posted in public schools, see something, say something. See something, say something. Don't assign your own filter or your own judgment to it. If something is off, you have to say something and leave it in the hands of the people who are supposed to do something about it. Now, for me, there was an employee who saw us kissing on school grounds. He saw something, he said something, it was ignored. Hence civil lawsuit, right? Continued abuse.
So wait, let's talk about that, because so this relationship's going on. Your teacher's 42 years old, you're 12. This went on, and I know you go into more details on the other podcasts, but so I would just encourage people to listen to the full episode there. But so this is going on for years, and there was different instances where people observed or saw things. But there's one particular moment that you can walk us through when you and this teacher are outside the school, and the janitor heard something and saw something. And I think that was the ultimate moment that led to a report being made that probably helped substantiate your claim. When you went to make a report, this was in the documents that lived, and it helped your case be successful because there were witnesses, in fact, and a report. So tell us about the janitor and what happened.
Well, you know him, Greg Landers. So the principal's grown son, on a Saturday, that weird 2-story building that had that green velvet ramp. Do you remember that? It's stairs on one side, green velvet ramp on the other. Kindergarten and preschool classes were usually below it, but that's where we were at. And it's on the side of a building, has a covered eaves. The alley is right there.
I got it. Yeah.
That's where we were. And we were messing around, and she always had me somewhere on weekends. I was always with her at her house, at the school, we're always somewhere. And I kissed her, and I knew the rules that she had, that we were not allowed to do anything in public. And I playfully smacked her butt, kissed her, pushed her against the wall. She reversed, pushed me against the wall, started kissing me. And then we heard this loud noise. Well, come to find out, I didn't know at the time. When we heard that loud noise, we scattered. She went one way, I went another. But it was Greg Landers, the janitor, who saw us. And he put in his report to the police that he felt like it was going to escalate even further. And he did the only thing he could think to do was like to bang a trash can lid, I think it was, really loud against something metal to break it up. And then he
when did he make the report?
From what I understand, immediately he reported to his father. No one reported to the police. Nobody, there was no police report ever made. I never got any help. No social worker involved. Now, you might remember this, which is interesting. Member of the church, Sheriff Jim Pope. Jim Pope now.
How?
He was on the board. My parents talked to Jim Pope. Jim Pope talked to Bonna Johnson and her husband. Like, so much happened here that should not have happened. So many adults involved in protecting the reputation of the school and the church instead of helping me. So she was let go. She was fired. No one was told why.
Oh, because I thought a police report had been made and that's why she was fired. So
nope.
Greg made a police report, but
he never made a police report. He
never made a police
report. The principal. No one ever made a police report.
So
now, my dad claims he made one to Sheriff Jim Pope, but there's no record.
Who claims they made a report?
My dad was led to believe that he made a report with Sheriff Jim Pope.
Oh, so
it never happened.
There was an understanding that it had been reported, although
from on my parents' side only. I never knew of any report. I didn't even know it was Greg Landers. I didn't even know anyone had caught or seen anything. I just knew she'd been fired. I didn't know why.
How did you find out later?
That happened. The teacher actually told me. So much later, she told me, she said, Greg Landers saw us. And I was like, oh, shoot. I'm so sorry. Then I blamed myself. There was a self-destructive thing because now this teacher who I loved and adored, I just really hurt. I got her fired. Like, just a whole other self-destructive spiral happened when she told me that. And of course, she was continuing her grooming and making sure that I stayed silent. And I continued to sneak around and see her for years. And they could not keep us apart. So eventually the church commissioned Bonna and her family as missionaries to Korea. And she went on to other Christian schools, and she went on to have other issues with other Christian schools, similar with me. I believe that is all done now because I've spoken to those schools. I ended up getting her fired from one of the schools where something similar was happening at the time.
Okay, so wait a second. They sent her out as a missionary into the world after that? Yeah. And supported her financially to be...
Yes, this is what churches do. This is their... No.
So that part I did not know, which is a whole nother level of the reason why we have to have an effective reporting process in place. And it does help to have a licensed professional person with you who does the reporting and documents it. And then like legally, that's like part of my job. Like,
well, every adult at that church and school, every adult failed. So multiple people who knew should have reported. However, I've talked to a lot of people who have reached out to me since I came forward, who have told me they were kept in the dark. Like they were told a completely different version of events. They were not told what Greg Landers saw. They were told that my parents were just trying to cause trouble. So the head honcho, Pastor Royal Blue, twisted everything. Mm-hmm. So he was trying to protect his legacy, but so much abuse happened under his watch, under his leadership, that he let go. I'm not the only story.
Not the only story with this particular teacher.
At that location with this particular teacher, yes, she did go after another student. That mom reported it.
In your class?
Nope, my sister Jackie's class. The mom reported it. The school did nothing. This was before she was fired. And they pulled her, the student out and put him over at Liberty Christian. And I found out about that much later. And that's actually what started the healing process for me, was finding out about that incident. That was the pivotal moment where I was like, wait, what? Wait.
You were not alone.
That it was anything other than what I thought it had been. Because the teacher was with me at the time. Why would she be acting that way with someone else? I didn't know.
Oh.
So that's when my adult brain started to kick in. And I was like, wait, what? Just if you can think of like this dark shade of doom coming across your body all at once, where you're like, OMG, what?
And that's a much younger person also.
Yeah. It was horrifying to talk to that other woman. I think I was like 37, 38. And I didn't touch it for a couple of years after that. Even after finding that out, nope. There was just no way I could even process it. But it stayed there.
So you talked to this other victim. Were they involved in this lawsuit, as in sharing their information to support your story?
They were not, only because we settled, but had we gone to trial, I believe that this other person would have been one of the witnesses.
Okay, so you mentioned other abuse. Were there other authority figures that you know of that were abusing children?
Absolutely. So since I've come forward, I have received multiple messages, 3 just off the top of my head, naming other people. I'm not going to name that. That's their story to tell, but they came to me and talked to me about it. And I got on the phone with each of them just so they could feel heard. The look back, that statute window has closed for them. This is really, really old crimes, but you just don't realize it.
So I was there at the school. Were these teachers or pastors or just a combination? Like, do I know them?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I bet you're dying to know. I'll tell you off air.
Okay.
Yeah,
we can play a guessing game. We can see if I match it correctly. So
yeah, I was I was a little surprised actually.
And so this makes a bigger story. And I know that when I called you after I saw your story on the news, you had mentioned that, yeah, all the people were reaching out, but you actually had some really negative feedback too from some people in the church. And I was very disturbed to hear about and very saddened and disheartened. And I guess that can be expected too, that level of denial that people just don't want to accept this truth. And so
I don't think they didn't accept it as true. Not one person accused me of lying, which I really appreciate. Not one. It was more, you're hurting the name of Christ by coming forward. This is not biblical. And one of them has since called and apologized, which was super cool. After the news story broke, after the lawsuit had settled and everything, I actually had the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with the current pastor of that church, Pastor Scott, and his wife. And I had my support person there, my best friend. Had a really good conversation with him. That was very healing. He was extremely compassionate. I told him who in his church congregation had been harassing me, and he took care of it. So
good.
One of them called and apologized, which was really nice. And, he came into this situation in this church when he had no idea what Pastor Blue, who was his grandfather, what he had done under his leadership. He didn't know. And then how I perceived how the church, Crosspoint, was handling the lawsuit was pretty negative. And it was really good to hear his perspective on his side of what the lawyers were instructing him to do, which made him appear very cold and callous. But I believe him when he said he had nothing but compassion for me and wanting to help the process along, and that he wasn't actually trying to hide anything. It was a really good conversation.
I'm so thankful you had that healing moment with him. And I wanted to...
He reached out because he didn't have to do that. His lawyers advised him against it. And I'm thankful that he reached out and we had that conversation. It was awesome. It was what true Christianity should be. Like, hey, this shouldn't have happened. I'm really sorry this happened. No.
And that's just a good reminder for people listening. Like, those moments can be so healing. Just a conversation, just a phone call.
Can I share another one? Pastor Steve Alexander. Pastor Steve, you know Pastor Steve, right?
He was my
favorite.
he was my favorite.
Oh, it's absolutely my favorite, hands down.
Shout out to Pastor Steve right now. He was my favorite. He always
49er fan, diehard
he was
49er
a good
fan.
role model, and like he was my junior high church leader. So like he was a good role model, and so
Phenomenal guy. And
thank God for good role models
yeah,
because like we need those. He always was just a stand-up guy, and I always appreciated him, and I am thankful for people like him.
he I always thought he looked like Tony Danza, so I always told him that. But he here's something that I don't think he'll mind me sharing. At least I hope he doesn't mind me sharing. They're just very awesome. When I was first starting to uncover what had happened, I was very early in my journey of realizing I'd been groomed. And I wanted to reach out to someone at from North Valley, who was there at the time, who could help me process it. And so Pastor Steve is the person I picked. Out of everyone I knew at North Valley, he's the one I reached out to. So I reached out to him on Facebook, and he ignored me. Then I reached out again, and he's like, "Why do you want to get on the phone?" And I told him why, and he ignored me. This was years ago. I don't know 8 years ago. And I tried to reach out. I think 3 times I tried to reach out. Then the civil lawsuit happens. It settles. It's in the news. And then he reaches out to me. And it was one of the most healing conversations I've ever had. He was crying. Karen, his wife, was crying. I was crying. He was so honest and transparent. And he said, I didn't even know what to say or to think. He's like, I should not have not responded. He felt so bad. He apologized profusely. But what a stand-up guy to call me, to give me his support, to talk about his experience at North Valley, his own trauma being underneath that leadership. And it was just, I hope that's okay to say, Pastor Steve, but he was so transparent and honest and apologetic. And I really appreciated that. I still think of him the same way I always did. Just a youth pastor that was always there for the kids. Not judgmental, cool, relatable. And in those moments when I needed someone to talk to and he wasn't there, it's not the end of the world. Someone else just stepped up. But I hope that he felt honored that he was the one that I thought I could talk to about it. And I appreciated that we had that healing conversation after the fact, where he shed light on his side of it, being in the school board meetings and what they were told. Completely different story. So it's not like all the adults stuck their head in the sand. It wasn't that cut and dry. There was a lot of misleading happening and going on, unfortunately.
Wow. What message would you give to these leaders of institutions about accountability and transparency? So it's like now you have this platform and you're in control of the narrative. So you get to speak out about things that you never could before. And now you have people listening. And there are people that work at these schools and churches or wherever. It's like, what message would you like to convey for the future? What changes would you like to see in these schools?
In church environments, particularly in these churches that had their own schools. Because that's the experience of what happened here. That was the environment I was in. We are seeing sweeping change because so many people in my age group are coming forward. So many lawsuits have happened. Change is happening. And I would like to encourage people in those situations to always believe the kids. Now, I'm well aware that there's going to be false accusations. It happens. It does. But let law enforcement sort that out. If you've got nothing to hide, there has to be some evidence. It's not always just she said, or she said, he said. You have to report. You cannot judge it. And also, you cannot, as a church, protect the offender. This is a sin. I hear that so much. Our brother has fallen into a sin. He is making it right. This is between God and this person. You did a crime. You did a crime. And the Bible upholds the law where you are. You can't just murder someone or rape someone and be like, I'm sorry, God, repent. Oh, I'm clean. You have to restore such a one. That's not how this works. There's so much twisting of the scripture in protecting these people, perps. I'm not going to say men. I'm not going to say women because it's both. Mm-hmm. And the churches are covering it up, silencing the victim who never gets a chance at healing because they were never validated or even maybe aware they were victims, which is what happened with me. And then passing the perp along to do it somewhere else. That's what has to stop. If you have an inkling of anything, you report. You can't judge it. You just report. This happened to me as a school bus driver. I'm a mandated reporter. I hear a student saying something. I have already, in 18 months of driving a school bus, had to talk to CPS. And it's something that maybe I personally think is probably not true, but the child reported, and I'm going to send it on. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to judge it. And so we need to see more of that, less protecting of the perp, more support for the victim. So the victim can become a survivor. If the victim is never validated or given help, they stay a victim. You turn that phrase to survivor when you're able to heal and go through it.
And I'd love to talk about, I know you highlighted some of the resources you receive through therapy, but through crime victim assistance, you can report something and you can get free therapy sessions. And so that's under the district attorney's office. So
and I did
crime victim witness.
Victim witness. Yeah.
Yeah, victim witness. So you can get, it's up to 40 sessions a year being a direct victim of a crime. And then your therapist can always recommend more sessions. And so it's no cost. So you don't need insurance. And if you just didn't want to report it to your insurance or you just wanted it to be a private thing, there are certain licensed therapists who take crime victim assistance and specialize in helping people heal. And
that's nationwide, that program. And the only thing they did require one thing. They required a police report. Whether or not the police do anything about it doesn't matter. But they did want a police report in order to qualify for that program, which I did use.
And I encourage people to make the report. And if you need help, you can book a session with me online at psychologydoctor.com. I do consults. I can make the call. I can dial the number. I actually type up the report. I fax it, submit it, do it. If it's a CPS report, if it's going to the police, I'll do it for you. And so it's just emotionally so overwhelming for people to do it alone. So I'd also like to mention familyjusticecenter.org. You can go to the website and look on the map from Canada to Kentucky, across the world. Wherever you are, you can look at the agency closest to you and get resources. And so there actually are a lot of great resources out there for people that I encourage people to access. And the first step is you can just get some of that therapy at no cost and then take the first step. And it sounded like through your journey, there was years that unfolded, layers unfolded, until we got to the point where you even mentally came to terms with taking action, civil action. And I think it's really brave what you did. I think you have a powerful voice and you're a role model for those that are still feeling so much shame to speak out. And it's still really hard, but you're explaining the steps you did, and you're on the other side. You're in a different place now. There's so much you've learned. And I just love how raw you've been with sharing your story and vulnerable. And I think people just, I'm proud of you.
Thank you. It feels good to talk about it. It feels good to talk about it. The more you get it into the light, the more it helps with healing. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to come on here and share just in a different way, different things about it. I encourage anyone who wants to, they can reach out to me too. They just want to chat. I'm not a professional anything. I'm a dental hygienist and a school bus driver, and and a single mom of 4. But I know what it's like to sit in that place where all you feel is darkness, and there's like no relief in sight. And when you can have a trusted person that you can talk to, who's literally, they act like a mirror. That was my experience with the therapist. My experience with the people who I trusted to talk to about it. They were like a mirror, and they showed me what actually was. They helped me sort through that grooming, and that is very scary. Most people who go through sexual abuse, there is a layer of grooming, and that doesn't just happen to the survivor, it happens to the whole family. And it's hard to peel that back and to try and understand that and to be able to move on and also prevent it from happening with other people.
I also wanted to mention for people listening that it's really powerful if you are going to file a civil lawsuit that you document everything. So if you're getting therapy, you're getting years of therapy, I get all those records. Sometimes it's thousands of pages of records. So recently I was looking through 15 years of psych records. So we're looking for, the validity of someone's claim and their truthfulness. So I think it's difficult for some people who dabble in other things like drugs or alcohol or other relationships or things, and they tend to want to be dishonest about certain aspects of their life. But I always encourage people, if you're going to do a civil lawsuit, the truth will come out one way or the other. So
to be prepared for that. And there's nothing left unturned.
That is correct. So any STD, any affair, any firing from a job, anything, you have to come to a place where you're being deposed for hours and being interrogated, and you're just telling the truth about your life. And by design, it's meant to intimidate you, right? And get you to drop out, which many people do. And on the last civil case, I testified for almost 14 hours in a deposition defending my evaluation on a person with their diagnosis. And that feels like being interrogated. And I'm not even the victim in that case, but you can feel how that is not something people look forward to be on the stand and to be
grueling.
It's grueling and grueling for me. So
yeah, the pressure. Yeah. Yep.
So my recommendation is, therapy before, of course, not just for yourself, but for documentation, but also during the entire civil lawsuit, because I have cases that go on for years and they're coming undone. Like it's a re-traumatizing. They're actually falling apart, and their symptoms can come back even worse, and they can feel really overwhelmed. And I recommend they continue to get treatment all during that time, because a civil lawsuit, you need that emotional support, and you can turn it into a healing experience and take control of the narrative while on the stand. But you really need support through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are tips that could help people get through it to the end, because in the end, there isn't any amount of money that can save you or heal you. Like it's something you have to do along the way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. For me, I didn't have to go to trial. It ended in a settlement. And I remember telling, I think it was my sister, there's just no amount of anything that can undo or fix it. And it's not about that. For me, it was just about someone taking responsibility. And I needed that. I needed for my own healing. I needed to hear it's not your fault. This shouldn't happen this way. I needed that validation. And it's just a really important part of my healing process and journey, and definitely not something you should do without support. You need lots of support. And I had lots of support. For sure.
I feel like you could go back into schools, Jessee, and like teach kids. Cause I like you and I could go in and teach kids about like boundaries or safe touch. Like
I'm mentoring on my school bus every single day. I got these kids and I drive sped. So I've got special needs kids and we talk about anything and everything. And, great mentorship is happening on that bus. And I love that because I want to feel like my pain means something. So I'm not sharing with them about what I've gone through, but I can hear the things that they're going through that are causing them to feel embarrassed or shamed or bullied and, all those emotions, and just how to talk to an adult in a healthy way about that and how to know when to ask for help and what needs help and what those steps even are. And I love that I feel like my own little advocate for these kids while I'm driving this bus. And it's great. It's a healthy, safe space for them. And I love that I could grow into an adult who learned and healed and didn't pass that trauma along. That I've got really well-adjusted kids and a great relationship, open relationship with them. I'm really proud of that. And I can see God's hand through all of it, which is amazing. Just the people that were put into my life to help guide and support just one little thing along the way. Because it did take me years to uncover this. This was a very slow process for me because I just couldn't handle it. And I don't know, some people might go faster than me. It took me a really, really long time. And I'm still healing. I'm still learning to trust. I'm still figuring stuff out. But I've got really supportive people in my life who I can trust and I can talk to candidly about those things, and I can keep moving forward.
Well, your support is going to continue to grow when people hear your story and reach out to you. And it does affect and change people's lives because I know because through this podcast, I've had a lot of people reach out and, it things can be meaningful for them and change their life. And we did an episode recently about domestic violence and pathological partners. And so many people reached out to me. It was a bit overwhelming that women that were being strangled and abused or beaten and trying to leave. And it pretty powerful for them to share that and just open up the window and share what's going on behind closed doors. And they're trying to seek solutions, and it's confusing and scary. And so I always try to educate people and provide resources where people can get help and start taking the steps to a better life and start the healing process. And so I really appreciate and admire you for sharing your story and your experiences and just opening up like this. And I know that it's so powerful and going to impact so many people. So thank you for just being so real and professional. And I'm so glad we were able to reconnect since, junior high traumatic days, I guess. And I'm just here. I'm just rooting for you and supporting you. And for all those people that are living in silence and can't speak up the way you do, like I know that it means so much to them.
Yeah, If I can speak to the people just for a second before we're done, who are living in that silent space, I have a thought. And you, as a forensic psychologist, you can tell me how valid this thought is, because this is how it was more for me in trying to come to acceptance in terms of what had happened. Is I think we are hardwired to avoid pain. And a lot of people in an abusive situation, that is their comfort zone. That's all they know. I mean, that's why there's a Stockholm syndrome, right? You have to make the best of it so you can make yourself come to believe that you love this person, or this person loves you and has your best interests at heart. We avoid pain. We're hardwired for that. So trying to come to terms with things that have happened, to me, felt like seeing an open fire and putting my hand into it willingly and leaving it there, which no one's going to do. You have a natural instinct. If you put your hand on the stove, ouch, that hurts, you pull back. There is no decision there. It just happens. And I feel like people who can't come to terms with it, they can't address it, they can't share it with other people, it's because it's literally putting yourself into a fire. The pain is unbearable, and you have to choose to feel the pain. Where's the healing in choosing to feel the pain, right? That's how it felt like for me. But little by little, with the support that I had through therapists and friends, and I would talk about it, and I would feel the pain for a second, then I'd pull back and feel safe again. And feel the pain for a second, then pull back and feel safe again. Every single time you do that, you get a little bit further in that process. And you come to find out that pain and that realization, that's your healing, that's your comfort. You have to debride the wound. You can't just put a Band-Aid on it and cover it up. It doesn't work. It festers, and it will affect every area of your life. Your relationships, the addictions that you have. It's there. It's not going anywhere. And so you have to put yourself in the fire. You have to feel the pain. And the good news is you don't have to do that alone. And you can do that at your own pace. And you can take, multiple years like I did, because you don't like pain. But I just wanted to put that out there. Healing is hard and healing is painful, but it is so worth it. It is so worth it to be able to talk about it, to hear other people's stories, and not feel like you're going to shrivel up and die every single time, right? There's freedom there. So that's all I wanted to add.
Well, thank you so much, Jessee, for joining me. And I'm sure people will have some follow-up questions or words of encouragement for you. And so this episode will drop on YouTube. So we'll see you over there. And of course, you can, if you have a civil lawsuit case, you can book a consult with me, psychologydoctor.com, or email me at ceo@psychologydoctor.com. And thank you so much, Jessee.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. For episode details and merch, check out killerpsychologistpodcast.com. And for forensic services, you can book online at psychologydr.com. That's psychologydoctor.com.